Rain hammered against my wedding dress as I stood outside the church, watching my parents' black Mercedes pull up to the curb. My father rolled down the window just enough for me to see his face, cold and distant like a stranger's. My mother sat beside him, staring straight ahead as if I didn't exist. "You're dead to us, Alyssa," my father said, his voice flat and final. "You made your choice." The window rolled up before I could respond. The car pulled away, taillights disappearing into the storm. I stood there in my soaked gown, my carefully arranged hair dripping water down my neck, feeling the weight of those words settle into my bones. Daniel's hand found mine, warm and solid. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I wasn't. But I would be. I had just been disowned by my family for marrying the man I loved, a man they never approved of because he didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. Because his skin was darker than theirs. Because his family came from struggle instead of privilege. My name is Alyssa Monroe. I was 26 years old when my family cut me out of their lives like a tumor they needed to remove. I was the only daughter in a family that valued legacy and appearance above everything else. My father, Harrison Monroe, built his fortune in real estate and expected his children to maintain the family's reputation. My mother, Victoria, came from old money and never let anyone forget it. I had two older brothers, Preston and Blake, who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. They attended the right schools, joined the right clubs, dated the right people. They were golden boys who reflected well on the Monroe name. I was different. I asked questions. I challenged traditions. I fell in love with Daniel Carter, a social worker from the South Side whose parents were immigrants. A man who had worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. A man who was everything my family despised simply because he didn't come from their world. My family didn't just quietly cut me off. They made it a public execution. 2 days after my wedding, my father sent a mass email to every member of our extended family. Subject line, regarding Alyssa's estrangement. In it, he explained that I had chosen to separate myself from the family by making decisions that conflicted with our values and traditions. He made it sound like my choice, like I had rejected them rather than the truth, that they had given me an ultimatum and I had refused to obey. Cousins I had grown up with stopped responding to my messages. Aunts and uncles who had celebrated every birthday with me suddenly had no time for calls. My brothers blocked me on every platform without a word of explanation. That Thanksgiving, I scrolled through social media and saw photos of the entire Monroe family gathered at my parents' estate. The long table filled with familiar faces, the fireplace roaring in the background, everyone smiling for the camera. There was an empty chair where I used to sit. No one seemed to notice it was missing. The hate mail arrived 3 weeks after the wedding. My mother's handwriting on the envelope, elegant and precise as always. Inside was a single page of stationery with the family crest at the top. "You have embarrassed us beyond repair. Your selfishness and disrespect for family values will have consequences. Don't expect us to be there when your poor choices catch up with you. You made your bed. Now lie in it." Daniel found me sitting at our kitchen table, staring at the letter. He knelt beside my chair and took my hands. "They're trying to break you," he said. "Don't let them." I looked up at him, this good man who loved me despite everything loving me cost him, and something inside me shifted. A door closed. A weight lifted. "I'm done asking for love I have to earn," I said quietly. "I'm done performing for people who will never think I'm enough." Daniel pulled me into his arms, and I didn't cry. I had cried enough for people who didn't deserve my tears. I started keeping a private journal of everything I observed about my family. Not out of spite initially, but as a way to process what had happened. I documented the patterns I had seen my entire life but never fully acknowledged. How my brothers could crash cars, fail classes, and treat people terribly without consequences while I was criticized for the smallest mistakes. How Preston had been arrested for drunk driving twice, and both times my father made it disappear with money and connections. How Blake's failed business ventures were funded repeatedly by family money while I had been expected to earn every opportunity. I wrote about the subtle racism, the way my mother talked about Daniel's family with thinly veiled disgust. The comments about his background, his work, his lack of proper breeding. The way my father had called him unfit without ever having a real conversation with him. I documented everything. Not to post online or share publicly. Just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That what I had experienced was real. 6 months before I met Daniel, my parents had started their campaign to marry me off to someone suitable. They introduced me to Camden Whitfield, a banker from a prominent family whose wealth matched ours. He was handsome in a bland way, with perfect manners and absolutely no personality. My mother pulled me aside during a family brunch after my third obligatory dinner with Camden. "He's perfect for you, Alyssa. His family is impeccable. Think about what a union like this would mean for our position in society." "I don't love him," I said simply. She looked at me with something close to pity. "Love is a luxury, dear. Marriage is a strategic partnership. You'll learn to appreciate what he offers." When I met Daniel 2 months later, I understood what love actually felt like. The difference between performing a role and being genuinely seen by another person. When I told my parents I was dating him, the mask of civility they had maintained cracked completely. "You'll regret this," my mother whispered during our final conversation. "Mark my words." My father called me to his office 2 weeks before my wedding. The room was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. He sat behind his massive desk and got straight to the point. "I'm rewriting the will," he said. "You won't inherit anything. Not the properties, not the investments, nothing. You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences." I had known this was coming. I had prepared myself for it. But hearing the words still felt like a punch to the chest. "That's fine," I managed to say. "I'm building something better than inherited wealth. I'm building a life based on love and honesty instead of appearances and control." He laughed, a cold sound without humor. "You think love is enough? You'll come crawling back when reality hits. They always do." "Don't hold your breath," I replied. Then I walked out of his office and never contacted them again. The next 5 years passed quietly. Daniel and I built our life piece by piece. We started a small consulting business helping nonprofits improve their operations. We bought a modest home in a neighborhood my parents would never visit. We lived within our means and saved carefully. When I got pregnant, I debated telling my family. Some small part of me hoped that a grandchild might soften their hearts. But I remembered my mother's letter, my father's cold dismissal, and I decided they didn't deserve to know. Our daughter, Maya, was born on a Tuesday morning in spring. She had Daniel's eyes and my stubborn chin. I sent birth announcements to friends and colleagues, but not to my family. They didn't send flowers or cards. They didn't call. It was as if I had truly died to them. But I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way I had never been while trying to meet my parents' impossible standards. Maya would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally, that her worth wasn't measured by her achievements or status. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard whispers about my family. Small things at first. Preston had been arrested again, this time for a DUI that resulted in a minor accident. My parents paid off the other driver and hired expensive lawyers to make the charges disappear. The local paper never ran the story. 6 months later, Blake's third business venture collapsed spectacularly. He had invested heavily in a tech startup that turned out to be poorly managed and undercapitalized. He lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, most of it borrowed from our father. I heard these stories through the grapevine, from people who knew my family but didn't know I had been cut off. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer help or sympathy. I just kept living my life, focusing on my husband and daughter and the work that mattered to us. My parents protected my brothers from consequences, just as they always had. But the cracks in the perfect Monroe facade were starting to show. The voicemail appeared on my phone on a random Thursday afternoon. I was making dinner when I saw my mother's number on the screen. I hadn't heard from her in over 3 years. "Alyssa, it's your mother," the message began, as if I wouldn't recognize her voice. "I've been thinking that perhaps we've been too harsh. Family is important. Maya should know her grandparents. Blood is blood, after all. Call me back so we can arrange a visit." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an expectation that I would welcome them back into my life as if nothing had happened. I played the message for Daniel that evening. He listened carefully, then looked at me. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I said. I blocked her number. I didn't return the call. If they wanted back in my life, they would need to do more than leave a casual voicemail after years of silence. I found out my father was sick from Mrs. Holloway, an elderly neighbor from my childhood who still lived on my parents' street. She called me out of the blue, concerned that I hadn't been to visit recently. "Your father's not well, dear," she said gently. "I thought you should know. He's been in and out of the hospital for months." My family hadn't told me. They had kept his illness secret, probably assuming I wouldn't care or didn't deserve to know. I thanked Mrs. Holloway for calling and sat with the information for several days. Part of me wanted to reach out, to try one more time to bridge the gap. But the larger part remembered every cruel word, every dismissal, every moment they had made me feel worthless for not conforming to their expectations. My father died 4 months later. I learned about it from his obituary in the newspaper. There was no call, no notification, no invitation to the funeral. Even in death, they maintained my exile. The obituary listed Preston and Blake as his surviving children. My name wasn't mentioned. 3 weeks after my father's funeral, a registered letter arrived from Hollister and Associates, a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal notification that I was named in Harrison Monroe's estate and my presence was required at the reading of the will. I stared at the letter in confusion. They cut me off. They removed me from the will years ago. Why would I be included now? Daniel read the letter over my shoulder. Maybe he changed his mind at the end. People do that sometimes when they're facing death. I wasn't sure what to think. My father had been many things, but sentimental wasn't one of them. Whatever this was, it couldn't be simple. Nothing with my family ever was. I called the law firm and confirmed I would attend. Then I prepared myself to see my family again for the first time in 5 years. The thought made my stomach turn, but curiosity won out over dread. The reading took place in a conference room with expensive artwork and a view of the city skyline. I arrived early and sat in a corner chair, away from the main table. When my family entered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. My brothers looked older, harder around the edges. Preston had gained weight and developed lines around his eyes from stress or drinking. Blake looked nervous, fidgeting with his phone. My mother was elegant as always, her hair perfectly styled, her expression giving away nothing. They stared at me like I was a ghost. No one spoke. We sat in uncomfortable silence until the lawyer, Mr. Hollister, entered with a thick folder of documents. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "This is the last will and testament of Harrison Monroe. Please note that significant amendments were made 2 months before his death. These changes were witnessed and notarized according to legal requirements." Preston leaned forward. "What amendments?" Mr. Hollister opened the folder and began reading. "My brothers received various properties and investments. My mother received the primary residence and a substantial living allowance." Everything seemed expected until Mr. Hollister reached the final section. "To my daughter, Alyssa Monroe Carter," Mr. Hollister read, "I leave the following: a trust fund of $500,000 to be held for my granddaughter, Maya Carter, accessible when she reaches age 25. Additionally, I leave 50% ownership of the Monroe family vacation property in Harbor Springs to be held jointly with her brothers." The room exploded. Preston shot to his feet. "That's impossible. Dad cut her off years ago. He told us she was out of the will." "This amendment was signed 2 months before his death," Mr. Hollister said calmly. "Your father was of sound mind and body when he made these changes. I witnessed the signing myself." Blake looked at me with pure hatred. "You manipulated him. When he was dying, you got to him somehow." "I haven't spoken to our father in 5 years," I said quietly. "I didn't even know he was sick until after he died. I learned about his death from the newspaper." My mother's face had gone pale. She stared at the documents as if they might disappear if she wished hard enough. "This can't stand. Harrison wasn't himself at the end. We'll contest it." The lawsuit came 2 weeks later. Preston and Blake filed jointly to contest the will, claiming our father had been coerced or mentally incompetent when he made the amendments. My mother supported them with a sworn statement saying my father had been confused and easily influenced in his final months. I hired an attorney, a quiet woman named Caroline Pierce who specialized in estate law. She reviewed the case and smiled grimly. They don't have much to stand on. The will was properly executed, and there's documented evidence of your father's mental competency right up until his death. But prepare yourself. This could get ugly. It did get ugly. My brothers hired investigators to dig up dirt on my life, hoping to prove I was an unfit parent or had financial problems that might suggest I manipulated my father for money. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Daniel and I had built our life honestly. Then Caroline started her own investigation. She subpoenaed my father's private papers and correspondence. What she found changed everything. My father had kept a private journal during his final year. In it, he wrote extensively about his children and his regrets. Caroline presented excerpts during the court hearing, reading them aloud to a packed courtroom. Preston has never earned anything in his life. I've enabled his failures and paid for his mistakes until he believes consequences don't exist. Blake is no better, constantly coming to me for money to fund ventures he never bothers to understand. They are weak men, and I made them that way. Caroline continued reading. Alyssa is the only one who ever had real strength. She walked away from everything I offered because she refused to compromise her values. I punished her for that. I see now that I was wrong. She was the only one who earned what she built. She's the only one I can trust to use this money wisely, to give Maya opportunities without destroying her character. The courtroom was silent. My brothers looked shell-shocked. My mother's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Caroline also presented emails and letters my father had written to his attorney, documenting his decision to include me in the will and his reasoning for doing so. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge ruled in my favor. The will stood as written. My brothers lost the case and, more significantly, they lost the money they had spent on legal fees trying to contest it. Preston had borrowed heavily to fund the lawsuit, convinced he would win and recover his losses from the estate. Now he was facing bankruptcy. Blake's financial situation was even worse. He had used the last of his credit to hire investigators and attorneys. When the ruling came down against them, he had nothing left. Within months, he would be forced to sell his house and downsize dramatically. My mother received what my father had left her, but it was less than she expected. The estate was smaller than anyone realized. My father had spent significant amounts bailing out my brothers over the years. What remained was comfortable but not extravagant. I attended the final hearing where the judge made the distribution official. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I simply accepted what was legally mine and left the courthouse while my family was still gathering their papers. The story spread through our old social circles. Not from me. I never spoke publicly about what happened. But estate battles involving prominent families are hard to keep quiet. People talked. Whispered. Speculated. The narrative that emerged wasn't kind to my parents or brothers. People who had known our family for decades started questioning other things. Preston's arrests that mysteriously disappeared. Blake's failed businesses that somehow kept getting funded. The daughter who vanished and was never mentioned again. The Monroe name, once synonymous with success and respectability in our community, became associated with dysfunction and hypocrisy. My parents' friends started keeping their distance. Invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. The social standing they had valued above everything slowly crumbled. I heard these things secondhand and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just a distant awareness that truth has a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how much money you spend trying to bury it. A journalist contacted me 6 months after the court case concluded. She was writing a piece about family estrangement and had heard my story through mutual connections. She wanted my perspective on reconciliation and forgiveness. Would you ever consider reconnecting with your family? She asked during our phone conversation. No, I said simply. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I've forgiven them for my own peace, but that doesn't mean I owe them access to my life. What about your daughter? Don't you think she should know her extended family? I thought about Maya, now 6 years old, happy and secure in the love of the small circle we had built. My daughter knows she's loved unconditionally. She knows her worth isn't measured by status or achievement. That's the legacy I choose to give her. My family can't offer anything that would improve her life. The article never ran. I think the journalist expected a story about reconciliation and second chances. My refusal to play that narrative made it less appealing. I didn't care. I wasn't interested in being inspirational. I was interested in protecting my peace. I decided to sell my share of the vacation property. I had no interest in joint ownership with my brothers, no desire to coordinate maintenance or argue about usage. The property was worth substantial money. My lawyer contacted Preston and Blake with an offer to buy out my share or sell the entire property and split the proceeds. They chose to sell. Neither of them could afford to buy me out, and neither wanted to continue co-owning property with me. The house sold quickly to a developer who planned to renovate and flip it. The proceeds were divided according to the will's terms. I used half the money to establish a foundation in Maya's name. The Alyssa Monroe Carter Foundation for Family Healing focused on helping women who had been estranged from toxic families. We provided legal assistance, therapy resources, and financial support for women trying to build independent lives. The irony of using Monroe money to help people escape families like mine wasn't lost on anyone. A local reporter called it poetic justice with pearls on. I called it putting money towards something that actually mattered. My mother showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon, 8 months after the court case concluded. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered. Her clothes were still expensive but slightly outdated. Her hair wasn't quite as perfectly styled. My assistant tried to stop her, but she pushed past and walked into my office unannounced. "Alyssa, we need to talk." I looked up from my computer, taking in this woman who had once terrified me with her disapproval. She seemed almost fragile now. "We don't need anything," I said calmly. "You need something. There's a difference." She sat down without being invited. "Your brothers are struggling. Preston's bankruptcy is finalized. Blake moved into a small apartment across town. I had to sell the estate and move into a condo. We're not the family we used to be. And you want what? My sympathy? My money?" I kept my voice level, emotionless. Years of therapy had taught me not to engage with manipulation. "I want forgiveness," she said, and for the first time, tears appeared in her eyes. "We were wrong about Daniel. Wrong about everything. Your father knew it at the end. I'm asking for a chance to know my granddaughter. To be part of your life again." I studied my mother carefully. Her tears seemed genuine, but tears are easy. Words are easy. Change is hard. "You want to skip to the part where we're family again," I said finally. "Where Maya calls you grandma and we have holiday dinners like nothing happened. But you don't get to skip the work that comes before that." "What work?" she asked, confusion mixing with hope on her face. "Accountability. Understanding. Real change. You disowned me for marrying a good man because he didn't meet your racist standards. You abandoned me when I needed family. You tried to steal the small inheritance my father left me. And now that your life is hard, you want back in mine because it's convenient. That's not how this works." My mother's face hardened slightly, the old imperious expression flickering across her features. "So you're saying no? After everything we gave you growing up?" "I'm saying you don't get to use guilt about the past to buy access to my future. If you want to be part of Maya's life, you start by understanding why you're not part of it now. You get therapy. You do the work of actually changing, not just saying sorry because you want something. And even then, I don't owe you anything." I stood up and walked to my office door, opening it. "This conversation is over. Don't come back here again." The holidays came around again. 10 years had passed since my wedding day, since I had stood in the rain and watched my parents drive away. Maya was now 11 years old, bright and curious and completely secure in her identity. We hosted Thanksgiving at our home. Not a large gathering. Just Daniel's parents, a few close friends, and a couple of colleagues who had become like family. The table was full but not crowded. The conversation was genuine. People laughed without performing. It was everything my childhood holiday gatherings had never been. Maya helped me set the table, carefully placing each fork and knife exactly where they belonged. "Mom, some kids at school have like 20 people at Thanksgiving. How come we keep it small?" I paused, considering how much truth an 11-year-old could handle. "Because quality matters more than quantity, sweetheart. I'd rather have 10 people who genuinely care about us than 50 people we have to pretend around." She thought about this, then nodded. "That makes sense. I like everyone who's coming." "Me too," I said, hugging her close. This was peace. This was family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had chosen and built carefully over time. My mother called one final time, 3 months after our confrontation in my office. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Alyssa," she said, her voice tired. "I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that I've started seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand the damage we did. To you. To your brothers by enabling them. To ourselves by valuing all the wrong things." I said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. I know I can't fix what's broken. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late for us. You were right about everything you said. Thank you for telling me, I said carefully. I hope therapy helps you. But my boundaries remain the same. I'm not ready for you to be part of my life. I may never be ready. That has to be okay with you. I understand, she said quietly. Then she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. Not reconciliation. But a small release of the anger I had carried for so long. My mother might never change enough to be safe for me. But at least she was trying. That was more than I expected. 1 year later, I made a donation to a women's shelter in my mother's name. Not out of kindness, but to end a cycle. The shelter helped women escape domestic violence and rebuild their lives. It was work that mattered. The donation was anonymous. My mother would never know about it. That wasn't the point. The point was choosing to do something constructive with the anger and hurt I had carried. The point was deciding that my mother's failures wouldn't define my choices. I was 42 years old now, and I understood something I couldn't have grasped at 26. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened or welcoming toxic people back into your life. It means releasing the power they have over your emotional state. It means choosing peace over perpetual anger. I was free. Not because my family apologized or changed or recognized their mistakes. I was free because I stopped needing them to. I built a life based on my values instead of their approval. I raised a daughter who knew she was loved without conditions. I created meaning from the pain they caused. My parents tried to erase me from the family story. Instead, they taught me the most valuable lesson I ever learned. You don't need your family of origin to have a family. Sometimes the family you choose, the one you build with intention and love, is the only one that matters. That was my legacy. Not the Monroe name or the money or the social standing. But the knowledge that I survived their rejection and built something better than what they offered. That I turned their attempt to diminish me into fuel for becoming someone I could be proud of. Freedom tastes like quiet. It tastes like Thanksgiving dinner with people who actually care. It tastes like watching your daughter grow up knowing she's enough exactly as she is. It tastes like finally being at peace with the choices you made and the life you built from the ashes of someone else's rejection.